Welcome to the 36th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast, brought to you by Animal Riot Press, a literary press for books that matter. It's your producer, Katie, here, and this episode has been edited to reflect our new name. If you're new to the Animal Riot community, welcome, and you can find out more about us at animalriotpress.com. Now on to the episode with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and today's guest, Tobias Carroll.
I'm your host, Brian Birnbaum. I'm here today with Tobias Carroll, author of the short story collection Transitory, out with Civil Coping Mechanisms, or also known as CCM. Mm-hmm. I've actually only known it as CCM, which is funny. And the novel Real, out with Rare Bird Books. And up next for Tobias is Political Sign, a work of nonfiction, which will be out with Object Lessons series of books in 2020. Tobias writes about books, music, and food for a host of places, is the managing editor of Vol.1 Brooklyn, and writes the Watchlist column for Words Without Borders, which we'll get into in a minute. Sometimes Tobias can be found on Twitter and Instagram. So yeah, go to his site, Tobias Carroll, and you can find him on Twitter and Instagram and read more about him. And so, yeah, should we call you Toby?
You can totally call me Toby.
Cool.
I prefer the fancy longer first name when I write.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I pretty much only use it there, and this has even kind of gone away in recent years, or like when my mom is really, really pissed at me. She will still be like, Tobias Carroll. But I have not. I feel like as I grow older, I've kind of managed to dodge the like infuriated pronunciation of my full first name, or really my full name, by my mother, which is good.
What's your middle name?
Andrew.
Oh, okay. So I get called Mary Catherine when I'm in trouble.
Oh, no.
I feel like that's a ubiquitous tendency. Like that comes from something deep in our DNA. Like parents call kids by their full
trouble.
given names, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm just Brian, so that I never... There was not really much Brian Stephen Birnbaum.
Yeah, I forget your middle name, Stephen, most of the time.
Yeah, there was never much of that, but my parents are also deaf, so they sometimes they would sign.
Yeah.
Angrily.
And I don't think the Stephen helps in the signing part.
No.
But when they were mad, they would usually use their voice anyway. So anyway, yeah, so today's brand of fuckery is brought to you by screaming the full given and the Lord's name, whatever you want to call it.
Screaming our names in vain. Full name.
The parental unit, anger,
your full
fury,
Hebrew,
apoplexy.
Christian name, whatever.
Judeo-Christian. And, all the other religions. We are, bipartisan here. Anyway, so yeah, let's start with Words Without Borders, because I want to know what it is, and we'll get into all that, but I'm also really curious as to how it fits in with your writing process and everything. So we'll get into all that, but yeah, let's start with what is Words with Borders?
This is actually a really solid segue, because I was working at the Words Without Borders table at the Brooklyn Book Festival.
Words Without Borders. I was saying Words with Borders, which is the antithesis. Our producers, I do not want you, Katie, to cut this, because that is the antithesis of what Words Without Borders is. And I have it like right in front of me, and I've been reading about it all day.
Were you saying Writers Without Borders before?
I was saying no,
yeah. I think
you said it, and then I started saying it.
Okay, I think that concept's even more.
But now we're back. We're back on brand. Okay, Writers Without Borders. Yes.
Words Without Borders.
Words without. Who's on first?
Brian
okay,
Stephen
let's go.
Birnbaum.
So it's an organization that has been around for about, I think, 16 years. I've been writing the column for about a year and a half now. The Watchlist column is usually it's about 6 books that are being published in a given month in translation. So yeah, it's been around for about 16 years. Oh, sorry, Watchlist covers mostly fiction, also poetry, also nonfiction, also graphic novels. I would say, for my own part, there's always the difficulty of trying to find a good balance of languages, of publishers.
Yeah, because let's start with like what it is, just for our listeners that don't know what it is.
So it's a monthly column, and it's generally about 6 books. Sometimes there will be 5, sometimes there will be 7, but usually it's an even 6. It's a quick description, generally taken from the publisher, of what the book will be about, what the book is about.
Mm-hmm. And they're all international books. These are books that are being they're in another language, and they're all being translated into English.
They're all in there was one month where I did 6 books in translation, and there was also a book about translation that New Directions had put out. I believe it's on haiku. And that was kind of included there as sort of a bonus where it seemed to fit, but I also didn't want to exclude a book that was in translation from the list. So yeah. So it's 6 books generally coming out in a given month. Sometimes, if a book is coming out on September 28th, and it's something I really want to get in there, it might make the October list, for instance. And there's also sometimes a little bit of wiggle room with respect to books that may have one release date in the States and one overseas. There have been a few things like, I don't know if you're familiar with Tilted Axis Press.
Yeah.
So there have been a few Tilted Axis books where usually it's stuff that's easily available in the States, although I've also ordered Tilted Axis stuff from, the States and received it. So, it's a little bit of it can be a little bit of a juggling act.
Do you read or speak in any other languages?
I do not.
Because I'm really always like curious about translations, and it really started with Bolaño when I was like younger, because he was kind of the first foreign writer that I got into, and then it made me start thinking about translations. And I've always been like,
Brian normally hates translations.
That's not true. That's not true at all. I don't hate translations. I hate the idea that it's being bastardized in any way. Even if the translator does a great job, it's the sheer fact that once you go from that language, I do feel like it's like there's a turn of phrase in every sentence, especially when I'm writing. It's like, how is that being captured in the other language? And I just really wish I was getting it. And, I wish I knew every language, but,
Well, I remember, I think I might be misremembering this, and I have a number of friends who work for the publication in question, so I'm sure if they hear this, they're going to I'm going to get some angry emails. I think it was in the first issue of The Believer, there was a conversation, I believe it was between Salman Rushdie and Terry Gilliam, and they were talking mostly about Don Quixote. And I think there was an argument in there of, I think one of them made the argument that that there has never really been, that it's an impossible novel to translate perfectly, because you're gonna, if you stay entirely locked in with, if you translate the prose faithfully, you lose some of the style, but if you keep the style, there isn't really an English language equivalent. And there was another book, I want to say it was translated from the Gaelic, but I could be wrong about this. It was an Irish novel written in the mid-20th century that had never been translated. And then there's a New Yorker piece about it when it came out. I believe it was 2 different publishers published 2 different translations at the same time. And so it was a joint review of both of them. And it sort of made the argument that, you get the sense, with one of these, you get a much richer sense of what the language was that was going on there and everything else, but it's a little bit more dry. And then there was one where they were kind of looking at this going, some of these phrases are not perhaps the profanity that a 19th century Irish woman would be using, but this also gives a sense of the irreverency of the prose.
So more the feeling, but less the exact.
You don't remember what the book was?
I am totally blanking on the name of it. I think it was a Yale University Press's series in translation released it. I can try to surreptitiously Google it on my phone.
We'll Google it after this.
Yeah.
Who won the review, though?
They kind of argued that both were worth reading, and kind of, if you have the time,
read both.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the thing, with Don Quixote, it's like, I feel like that applies to every single translation. Does it not? I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Katie's the only one in the room, I guess, that speaks another language. She reads in French too. But I don't know. I'm a big fan of translations just because I think translations in general is a huge art form. We need to get Aaron back on. Do you know Aaron Puccian?
Sounds familiar.
You guys should connect.
Yeah,
I should introduce him to Words Without Borders because he translates from Greek and other Latin sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure he has 8 PhDs. So.
And now, of course, I'm wondering if I have if I've already encountered some of his translation work.
Could be.
He does a lot of Greek classic translations. But
he's working on a what is it? Gender and sex an LGBTQ.
Like coffee table book with
translation of LGBTQ Greek texts and stuff, and putting them
like
in
photos
context and everything. Yeah, we're
Which
really
sounds
excited about it. Yeah.
But about translations, it's like one of those things where like I can't. There's no way I could say I hate them because like you can't be for or against translations. They're just necessary, right? Like if I want to read Bolaño, for example, and I can't read Spanish, that's it.
Yeah.
Like, right? It's like my feeling comes from the just desire. I feel like that conversation about Quixote can just be applied to any translation. Is there anything else you want to say about your column? Like, is there anything upcoming, or is there, or like?
It's every month, so I'm actually kind of waiting. Generally, I will submit I will submit a list of books that I'm interested in to Jessie Chafee, and then she will kind of get back to me to make sure that the books that I'm writing about are not being covered elsewhere, because there are longer reviews published. There will be excerpts and interviews and things like that published. So there's generally just a sense of, making sure that the 6 works that I'm covering in a given month are not also being duplicated elsewhere. And again, it's always a challenge, because it can be a challenge to, there may be a large number of books being published in translation, but I also don't want to do a column where it's 6 books being translated from French or Spanish, which I feel like very much are the are the largest too.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes if I'm doing a book where it's a book translated from the Spanish and the author is Spanish, and a book being translated from the Spanish and the author is Mexican, if it's kind of a if I'm dealing with multiple nations, multiple continents, then it's a much different thing. But it's kind of, especially when just in a given, I'm limited to what's coming out in a given month generally. So sometimes it can be really frustrating when there isn't necessarily, it's very much like the languages, the languages where there are sort of an abundance of translators, rather than, sort of a one that really fully reflects the number of literary works that are being written in languages around the globe.
Yeah. How did you come upon this editorial gig?
I'd interviewed an author for Words Without Borders, and basically the person who had previously been doing the Watchlist shortly afterwards announced that they were kind of stepping down from it. And so they offered it to me, and I said yes.
Is that a volunteer gig, or is it a paid gig?
It's a paid gig.
Yeah. That's great. We're always asking all the writers that come on how they fund their lives.
I think I've made almost $500 in my life off writing, so that's pretty fucking awesome.
Were you going to ask your question?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay, so we have 2 of the biggest fans of Laszlo, what is it, Krasnorkai?
I can't even say.
I can't say his last. And so he got his come up through Doctors Without Borders. I'm just kidding. That was a fucking terrible joke. I just refuse to even try at this point, But yeah, so they're huge fans.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, massive, massive fans. Yeah, when did Melancholy of Resistance is your guys' favorite book by him, right?
Yeah.
And that came out.
Have you read that?
I think that's the one of his I've read. I have not read nearly enough of his work.
I mean, it's not easy. That's probably the one that I think most people have read. But although I think it's very funny that this book that's coming out, that's one long sentence. What's it called? Duck's
Newbery Report?
Yeah. And people are freaking
It's
out
Laszlo?
that it's one. No. It's this
no.
woman. What's her name? Ellen something?
Oh, yeah.
Lucy Ellman?
Yeah.
Is that right? Okay.
I think so, yeah.
So the book's one long sentence, and people are freaking out about it. And I'm like, Laszlo K over here has been doing this stuff for years.
Yeah. It's funny. It's actually, when I was reading Melancholy, that was one of the books where I was I kind of got frustrated, because I was I want this. I wish I could read it in the original language.
Yeah.
It just felt like I could just feel it. I could just feel I wasn't getting the thing that I don't know. I'm so about language.
Well,
that,
Hungarian would be a cool language to know too.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, just looking at Laszlo's name, it's look at all those accents above the letters. It's it just looks so rich. Yeah.
So what Brian's asking is, do you have contact with Laszlo?
I think that's what Katie's now asking.
I do not. No. No. I mean, I guess I could. I have a press contact at New Directions, so I probably could if nothing else, send an email and get a galley of the book. But God. Beyond that...
that would be amazing. But see, in my head, I imagine him to never own a computer and to only write things in like a quill and ink on parchment paper in like the dusky caves of Hungary somewhere.
Yeah, his photo...
I think I need that picture in my head.
I can see him with like a pretty cool typewriter, though. His photo is pretty...
In a cave, though.
Look at this photo. He's just like, he's kind of like got a smirk. He's like, he's got like sly eyes, and he's got a cigarette just like right here. Is that a cigarette? No, that's not a cigarette. It is a cigarette.
Is it George R. R. Martin who like still writes using like... No, I'm sorry.
Is he still alive? That's a better question.
I was conflating George R. R. Martin with John McPhee, who I think still writes about how he has like this very primitive computer program that he has used since like the early 80s.
Oh, wow.
As like his word processor. And like it was in one of his more recent books where he's writing about it, and I'm like, this sounds like it's basically him talking about how it's like the only word processing software he's ever learned to write on, and he uses it for everything. And I'm just like, it's one of those things where it's interesting to see how, like, at some point must have been the most state-of-the-art word processing thing. Right. And now it's like, it feels like reading a dispatch from, like, a steampunk universe.
And the fact that he hasn't had any malfunctions to his computer and hasn't had to go get it fixed. If there would be a person today that could fix that,
maybe he has someone that just, like, gets, like, the software installed into his new laptops or something.
Could be. Like he has some MDOS program
Yeah. That's definitely going to be me. Like every time they update Microsoft Word, I get pissed off.
Yeah. I've definitely moved away from, like, for the longest time I worked on Word. And then for a while I was using this very bizarre... I was using the web-based Word on like a laptop and on a tablet. And I've recently begun doing more. I've started doing more and more in Google Docs just because...
Yeah, I've moved everything into Google Docs now.
It's easy. Like
I'll never do it.
I use Pages a lot on my desktop because...
I hate Pages.
It's just so newfangled. You guys are just... You guys are so gauche.
I think since I started using a Chromebook about 5 years ago, and I think that was also kind of the thing where... It's still a bummer because there was like an Android app that Google bought and sort of folded into Google Docs and Sheets and everything. And that was what I used for the longest time, and I really, really liked that. And I again would have the last two jobs I had before I started freelancing full time. I had an Android tablet and I had a Bluetooth keyboard. I still use the Bluetooth keyboard, but the Android tablet I don't really do much writing on anymore because the Chromebook is about the same weight as the two combined. But I would just, after the workday would end, especially the last job I had that basically was a job that was so frustrating, I was like, I'm going to freelance full time because and I know it's like a weird leap into the unknown, but that still seems far better than like doing this for any more than I am now.
What were you doing before?
Or
you don't want to say?
I will say I was doing web development work for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey.
Oh, Lord.
And I was doing it right around the time of Bridgegate.
What's Bridgegate?
Oh, that's
the Chris Christie thing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh.
Also, Port Authority, one of the biggest rivals to Robert Moses' empire. I will say that. Just fun fact, Brian just finished The Power Broker a couple weeks ago, about a month ago. Anyway, just had to drop that in.
My personal favorite, the one really cool thing, though, that I learned from my time with the Port Authority that I had no idea was before. It's like I grew up in Central Jersey, so generally driving up to New York would frequently involve, especially like I had a car for the first couple of years I lived in Brooklyn, so when I would be coming and going from visiting family, I would go through Staten Island, drive up, go through Staten Island, go to Brooklyn over the Verrazano, and I would always take the Outer Bridge crossing, and I was always like, oh, because it's the outermost bridge, right? No, there was a dude named Eugenius Outerbridge.
Eugenius Outerbridge?
Eugenius Outerbridge.
That's quite a name.
Which, like, seems like the sort of thing that, like, you would encounter in, like, a sub David Foster Wallace.
Like I was literally about to say a postmodern. That's the most postmodern name I could think of.
Like Eugenius Outerbridge
yeah.
strode into the Starbucks.
Yeah.
Like, nope, real dude. There was a bridge named after him, Eugenius Outerbridge. I gotta hand it to Eugenius Outerbridge because
Eugenius Outerbridge. I kind of want to use that name for something.
Yeah,
I think everyone should use that name for something.
And just going back to word processing, one thing is, first of all, Alexa's probably listening to everything we're saying. And so when you got Google Docs on, the NSA is probably reading everything you're fucking reading.
Could be.
In this particular case, it's like they're like, oh great, someone's writing weird fiction.
If they want to read my fiction and maybe drop in some notes.
The data, man, the buzzwords, they're on you, man. Who knows what they got these days? And in Book of Numbers by Josh Cohen, basically I don't want to spoil it. Never mind.
Okay. I need to read that.
It's definitely as difficult a book as you're gonna read.
Yeah,
you know. But I really enjoyed it. I thought it needed some more drafts.
I've read
especially the first and third sections because the second is like purely brilliant.
I've read the novella collection that Grey Wolf did a couple of years ago, A Heaven of Others, and Wits, and like I was floored by Wits, but it was also. It felt at times like a book I was wrestling.
What are these? What I've never heard of these books.
His couple of his earlier novels.
Josh Cohen's.
Yeah,
okay.
Wits is this just like mammoth book about Judaism, and it's actually the one thing that like I saw a lot of things where it's like it's this like epic work on Judaism and culture and everything else, but it's also one of the most New Jersey books I've ever read. Where I was just like, y'all didn't tell me this was like gonna have scenes set at like Garden State Parkway rest stops. Like I would have gotten to this like 2 months earlier if you told me that.
Yeah. I feel like he's like the great American Jewish writer. His newest novel is like Something Kings, like The Moving Kings or something like that. Yeah, and it's about a moving company. Like everything in every book he writes is like with Jewish characters, you know. Except for honestly, like Book of Numbers, except for the biblical reference, kind of, you know. Anyway, so we can't meet Laszlo, unfortunately.
Oh.
It's a bummer.
Maybe
we'll break it to David later.
I'll find another way.
Yeah, I mean, I even think David named a character in his upcoming novel after. It basically Laszlo. Is after Laszlo. Yeah,
amazing.
And because Laszlo's kind of a nihilist.
He named the
like,
character,
you know.
just to plug it, Laszlo Catastropha.
Yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. I feel like melancholy is not nihilistic, but it is absurd. It's absurd. To the point where hyperbolically, like asymptotically approaches nihilism.
It has one of the best last pages or couple pages of a book, I think.
But David's book is very also asymptotically approaches the axis of nihilism. So
anyway, so you also work for Vol.1 Brooklyn now.
Yeah.
Can you talk about what you do over there?
Sure.
You get paid for that too.
It is an entirely volunteer operation.
We're about to kick you out then. So
you make too much money as a writer as it is.
So Jason Diamond started that 10 or 11 years ago now. And I've kind of been around since the early days.
Really? Wow.
We publish Sunday stories, which are generally fiction or memoir every Sunday. We do bi-weekly essays on Wednesdays. And then other than that, interviews with writers, with editors, sometimes musicians, other sort of book reviews, critical pieces.
It's crazy to me how, like, in a decade, Vol.1 Brooklyn has become one of those staples in, like, the literary scene now, in just, like, 10 years. And it seems like that's almost impossible.
And I really respect, like, journals, you know, what have you, because it really is a labor of love. Like, no one's getting paid. I asked you that out of jest. Like no one gets paid for that. And whenever someone starts to think about starting their own, most of the people I talk to say as soon as they started looking into it, they were like, fuck that, I'm not doing this. Like, you know. So I do have a lot of respect for journals.
It can be it's a weird thing because it's like, for me as someone who writes for money, if nothing else, I try, if someone reaches out and says, you know, hey, are you looking for a review of this? I will try to be very upfront and say, like, we don't pay, but like, I'm also, this isn't a case of me going, you're not getting paid. It's kind of like nobody, you know, in this.
Yeah, no one here gets paid.
You know, and if someone wants to send in a couple of reviews so they can build up clips, and then, you know, I've been very happy to see a number of folks who like we've published, have gone on to,
Yeah.
parlay that into very high profile reviewing work, which I'm always very happy at, where it's like, good, you got the thing.
And is that what you mostly oversee at Volume 1?
It's a little bit of everything. I mean, it's honestly a lot of it. It's something where the more I can kind of get scheduled out, or it became a lot easier when I started, keeping track of stuff in Google Calendar. But it's still like it can be a lot, just because it's like I am kind of our story review group, so it's
Okay.
more often than not ends up just being me taking, sort of hunkering down for a night and just being like, all right, I'm going to go through like several dozen fiction submissions right now.
There's a lot of people on the team, though, right?
There are. I mean, it definitely goes through flux, and I think so it's a lot of...
Yeah. Well, we try and tell people, like, especially writers who are trying to build up that portfolio, like you're talking about, writing reviews for other writers is is literary karma in the bank. Because
that's basically how I started.
Yeah,
is doing reviews.
Yeah, all the
I
people,
I haven't even done that many. I maybe have done like 5 or 6.
And then all the people whose books you reviewed, I reached out to, and I was like, hey, Brian wrote this review of your book like a few years ago. Can you review his book now? And they were like, absolutely. And it does come full circle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a tricky thing too, because there was I feel like when I want to say it was the Millions got bought by, I want to say, was it Publishers Weekly a few months ago?
Was it?
Yeah, I heard about that.
It was somebody, I can't remember.
Yeah, I heard about that. They also just got under a new director or something last year or something, right?
Yeah. But it was interesting because there was a lot of discussion of, was the Millions kind of the last like literary website of a certain both prominent and
pedigree.
Yeah. And I think that's
like,
true.
let's just come out and say it, like, I
think the Millions can do like the Millions interview with, they just had the Millions interview with you, if memory serves, right?
Which was very surreal.
Yeah.
I was like, I'd never thought I'd be in the Millions. I was like, man, like I remember reading like stuff from my professor Garth Hallberg, who published City on Fire, and like him doing a profile on another of my favorite writers, Sergio de la Pava. What? Yeah, here we go again. It is a running joke that I will mention Sergio or Susanna de la Pava on every single episode, and it gets weirder every single time.
Can I share my really embarrassing Sergio de la Pava story?
Oh my God, you're the first person who's had like a response to like that name when I weirdly just bring it up.
So last year I interviewed him for Long Reads about his then new novel, which
Lost Empress, right?
Lost Empress, which I loved.
Brilliant.
I reviewed it for 3 a.m. Yeah, it was. I fucking love that book. Yeah.
Like I still haven't read. I've read Naked Singularity and Lost Empress. I haven't read the one in the middle yet. Which
Persona. Yeah. I like his first and third the most, but Persona's...
We're Sergio stands over here.
Oh yeah, for sure. Persona's got the biggest departure in tone.
Oh, interesting.
It's very it's very austere in some ways. But anyways, continue.
I'm trying to imagine his approach to fiction blend, but done in an austere way. And
it's kind of more austere, but it is. It's very different than his others.
So I've been doing interviews probably for, over 20 years. I mean, I kind of started out, my sort of foray into interviewing was basically doing a punk scene when I was in college. And I think a lot of what I do now kind of just is a direct outgrowth from that in many, many ways, which I can go into. But I have always had, and I've gone through a number of different digital recorders. The one I currently have is about 10 years old. At some point, probably need to buy something I have my phone as a backup right now, but I also like the idea of having a dedicated recorder as opposed to just...
Same, we have,
So generally, I will just put the phone on speaker, hit record on the recorder, talk. And, I'm interviewing Sergio at 8 o'clock on a Friday night because that was when he could with his schedule. Mm-hmm. We have a lengthy, sprawling conversation. I thank him for his time.
I think I know where this
is
going.
And I send it, I use an online transcription service. So I hit it in, send it in, and I was going to go over and see a friend's band play. And I'd 5 minutes later, I get a thing back that's like, hey, so there's no usable audio on this. And I'm like,
God.
I knew this is where this was going.
And I kind of press play, and I'm like, and there's just 40 minutes of static.
Oh God, my stomach is not feeling well.
And I realized that at some point the external microphone had gotten a little bit loose, so it was just, rather than recording, it was never happened to me before. And I'm just
air.
And I'm like, first, I feel terrible. Second, I was just like, well, I've just lost this really cool assignment. Because I feel like with most writers do not have like the super intense day jobs that he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
was about to say, because when you said 8 p.m. on a Friday night is
Yeah.
because he handles a billion fucking cases at like,
Yeah.
as a public defendant.
Oh, God.
So I'm just like, I send this like incredibly apologetic email to his publicist. I'm like, I'm so sorry. If he doesn't want to do this again, I completely understand. Like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And then I get an email back like the next day. It's like, oh, totally fine. We can reschedule it for like next Tuesday. And it's like,
Yeah, they're like the most generous people ever.
Yeah, right.
But,
No, they
oh my
they
God.
really are. Yeah. I know.
Every time we record a podcast or do something, I always have like one moment where I'm like, is everything going to disappear? And then I'm going to have to call this person and be like, you got to come back.
Ugh,
Yeah.
I feel for you so much, man. That must have been awful.
it was a good conversation, and it was very weird because I was didn't want to just try to replicate that conversation.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's probably a lot of good morsels there, and it's like, man, that's rough.
There were a couple of like
So rough.
cut from the transcript. There were a couple of like, well, as we said in our last iteration of this conversation,
Yeah. Oh, God. Is that probably like your worst freelance moment?
No, my worst freelance moment was I had a very last minute interview with Orhan Pamuk,
Oh, I don't know who that is.
Turkish writer.
Was it for
was
Doctors
for-
Without Borders?
No,
Doctors.
Words Without Borders.
it was for
I got it now. I'll stop.
It was for Hazlitt, and basically I just like ran into subway trouble, and like it was the sort of thing where he had like this very narrow window, and I just like hit subway issues, like hit like subway problem after subway problem, and had like 12 minutes to talk to him, and it was just like he himself, however. Thankfully, he was he was very kind. He was just like, "Would you like some tea? Like, take a deep breath."
We
Like,
don't fucking have time for that.
so yeah, it was that.
Don't
whole
you see
part
how much
was
I fucked up? You're offering me tea? Why are you being so nice?
Oh, God.
And I think thankfully, like, he's also someone who, because he's been writing for so long, you can kind of ask him something and he will give you back this like lovely like miniature essay, perfectly sort of calibrated in response. It's like, okay, great. So that was like, I think my most personally nightmarish, just because it was like the logistics of it also involved like editors talking to publicists. So, and then publicists and other publicists all being very angry with me because I was not there on time.
Oh.
So yeah.
Well, you've had so much experience with like big name writers, different writers out there. I don't know. Is there one in particular that like one interview or review or feature, anything that you've done that was just like particularly like awesome and that you still like after time are excited about?
Oh, wow.
I really want you to say the one that didn't get recorded with Sophia.
The one that never was.
I totally feel on the spot right now, so I'm like, oh God, I don't know.
Fair enough. We can come back to it.
Yeah.
I will actually say this is just one that's coming to mind. A couple of years ago, I interviewed Conan Jones for Vol.1, and that was a really enjoyable conversation. Just in terms of just like we met up at like a coffee shop near Lincoln Center and just like had this incredibly long, sprawling conversation. That was a pretty enjoyable.
Is there anything in particular about that interview, or do you just remember the feeling?
More the feeling. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like knock on wood, I don't think I've had a lot of interviews that I would consider bad.
For our listeners, Toby actually just knocked on wood. So,
There were
a single tap.
There were a few that like. There was one where it got off to a really awkward start because the person I was interviewing, who is like, he's a very talented writer and translator and editor, like any of which just on his own he would be fantastic at. But the fact that he has all three, this is the author and editor and translator Ken Liu, And I think the first question I asked him was something that he had been asked a lot. So he was kind of like, well, as I've said, in a number of other interviews when asked this, I was like, oh, crap. No. I fucked up.
That's a punk move.
Yeah.
We won't call him out for that.
Yeah. I'll just say it. I would never do that. But
well, I mean, and I will say the rest of the interview was perfectly fine, but I just very much felt, because it's like you're talking to someone who is, again, like, I think one of the anthologies of like Chinese science fiction that he's edited and translated, it was kind of just began with him just literally translating, sort of translating short stories because nobody else was doing them. So it's kind of like, okay,
cool.
That's a heck of a thing.
Yeah. That's really cool.
So yeah, he was very much a formidable presence. And there have definitely been, I'm trying to think, there have been some other folks where it's kind of like, oh my God. But yeah.
We definitely hit some, like, we've been doing the podcast for a while, and obviously like the reading series too. Like, you're always going to we've had some moments where we were just like, this is happening right now at the reading series.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, even we just did one with Sugi Ganeshanathan and Whit Terrell, and like just with people from like the Iowa workshop, I was like, oh, you got in there? I was like, who the fuck am I? Like,
Well, that was more because you were intimidated because they're so pedigreed.
Yeah.
And they're super intelligent people.
Yeah,
but no,
right,
I just meant like in general, like we've had some people like up on stage who it's just like went off the rails on the mic or something.
Oh, I see what you're talking about.
Yeah, things like that.
Right,
where we were just like, okay, we're in this. This is awkward, but we're gonna just there's nothing you can do, so we're just gonna own it.
Oh yeah. Something that really bothers me, I'm just gonna say this right now, is when there's an allotted amount of time. I just experienced this recently, and like people just totally disregard it. And we've talked about this. I think we talked about this recently on like a podcast or something. But yeah. But anyway, let's. I want.
Tobias, when did you read? That was a number of years ago.
Yeah, I want to say at least two and a half, maybe.
Yeah.
I think that's the last time I saw you. I want to say, yeah.
I tried to find.
I think so.
Because we write personal bios for everybody. I tried to find your bio, but I think actually Devin might have written it. And said it, so I think he's the owner of that somewhere.
I still have the pencil sketch of me done while I was reading.
Somebody did a pencil sketch of you? Oh, that's cool. Do you remember who it was?
I don't. Oh. I had never seen them before. I never saw them again. But
I don't know.
Hire them.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That'd be awesome.
Well, I've been talking about other writers. Do we want to?
I was going to ask if you wanted to talk about your work a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what I was going to do.
Okay, there you go. Yeah. One of the 910, she owes me a Coke. Yeah, before you do a reading,
what are you working on? Yeah,
where you're coming, like how you started, where you coming from, all that good stuff that you usually ask people who write.
All right. Well, I mean, I think every book has been very different.
Yeah.
I mean, Transitory was a collection of short stories, and that was probably the one that came together the most easily, just because it was a question of like looking at short stories I had published, figuring out which of them worked well together, figuring out what order they went in, and then after it had been accepted for publication, talking with Michael Seidlinger from Civil Coping Mechanisms about potentially adding a couple more to it, and then getting 2 more stories in there and just figuring out where they went.
So you only added 2 to the already published collection?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I mean, that was... I mean, because it was sort of... It had been submitted during, their sort of open call for submissions, so...
I like that, though, because most of the stuff that I've published have been essays, and like I've kind of wanted to put out a collection of essays, so I kind of like the idea of already having a body of work out there and like creating a theme. I thought that's cool. I like that.
There are definitely like, I don't know if you're familiar with the writer John Langan, who writes these like immaculately structured, very literary horror stories.
Sounds like a better version of Stephen King.
I also really like Stephen King. So
yeah, I'm sorry to offend you.
No.
He's like, to me, I'm gonna say this. I have to now. Like, I think he's such a good writer. I just fucking hate the way he like portrays horror. Like I like when he's writing about his characters, it's so good. And then when he gets to the horror elements, I'm like, you have a fucking cosmic turtle that stretches towards infinity,
Oh
and
my
I'm just
God, I
like,
forgot about that
I'm like,
part.
what the fuck is this? Anyway, I'm sorry. I know you love him. And honestly, I love him too. Like, from.
I can see a copy of it
Yeah,
behind you on.
I think I read it like
books.
last year or something. And I finished it.
Yeah.
I'm not a fucking punk. Like, I'm finishing. I finish shit. Like, I see it through.
Was you must have read from Transitory. I remember you
Yeah.
read a very funny short story. Do you remember what you read?
I do not,
Yeah,
unfortunately.
I
You
know.
don't remember if it was from Transitory?
I think it must have been, right?
I think it was, but although it might have been long enough after it was published that I was like, I have a weird sense though that it might have also been one where I was like, this is gonna be my first time reading something that's not from either book.
Could be.
Just because I'd been doing a lot with that. Like,
Did you and Dolan Morgan read it the same night? I feel like maybe that was the case, but maybe it wasn't.
did we?
I don't know.
There's
so
a weird
long ago.
part of me. There's a weird part of me that thinks we didn't, if only because I probably would have headed back at the same because we live like 2 blocks apart in Green Park.
Oh, really?
So
And you probably would have remembered because the first time I saw Dolan read, he read this story about this giant and like this woman who wanted to fuck this giant. And it was like, and me and Devin looked at each other and we were like, this is literally the best story I've ever heard in my life. And the way he read it was like, dude, it was, and she was like doing laundry and thinking about this giant fucking her. And I was like, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard.
actually, I'm trying to think. The weird thing is I do have a past reading section on my website, which is more for my own reference than anyone else's. So I'm like, I can confirm
maybe
that.
I'll look. I'm on it right now.
Yeah.
So what's Political Sign about?
So Political Sign is
Your next one coming out in 2020.
It's,
And I also like it's coming out with like this press. It's just like, it seems interesting to me.
Yeah. So Political Sign is, it's part of the Object Lesson series of books. So like Summer Brannon's done one, Allison Kinney, a whole bunch of writers I like have done work in this series. And it's basically like a 30,000 word, more or less long book about a given object. So, they've had everything from hotel, like Joanna Walsh did a book on hotels. There's been one on...
So they're all kind of like treatises? Is that like kind of what it's like you kind of focus in on like...
Yeah.
It's kind of eponymous object lessons.
And they're definitely, I think, different. The approaches that I've seen have been very different. I don't know that I think at some point I said to someone who had sort of more of a music background, I was like, it's kind of like the 33 1/3 series, but like for any object you might find in the world or sort of any abstract concept you
I
might
was
find
about
in the
to
world.
ask you that literal phrase because I'm now thinking of the weather monograph that I'm going to write.
Nice.
I'm obsessed with winter weather.
Oh, nice.
And so for all my weather nerds out there, Paul Cosin, I'm coming for you. Okay, anyway, continue.
So the very sort of condensed version is that, they have an open call for submissions. So I had submitted a proposal for them, and then that sort of evolved and went through various permutations and ended up being selected for publication. So I'm in the middle of working on that right now. I leave for a residency for the month of October, where the bulk of what I'm going to be working on is that. I was, for the second half of August, I was at a residency where I was doing a fair amount of work on this as well, both getting some writing done and getting some structural things figured out. And I've never written... This is the longest nonfiction work I've ever written. When I was writing up the proposal for it, I was very keen to, structurally speaking, keep each of the chapters fairly self-contained, because I feel like especially with, having to get a draft in fairly quickly, if I think of this as like 8 3,500 word essays, that's a lot more manageable than one 30,000 word book.
Structurally coherent 30,000 word book. And so the object is political signs.
Yeah.
And so are there each of the 8 on a different political sign? How does it work?
I have to ask, is the swastika in there?
It's not.
No.
There are still things that are going to be written, so it might get in there.
Yeah. Confederate flag. I'm asking about if there's any super touchy subjects. Basically,
there are
I'm
definitely going to be
curious,
some touchy subjects.
Yeah.
I think with it, I'm trying to. I think at least as of right now, it's going to be somewhat idiosyncratic in places, just because I'm the person writing it. But like,
Yeah.
it's, you know, it's sort of beginning with like it sort of began out of an idea of riffing on like political yard signs and billboards.
That's what I was thinking
and the
when
sort
you
of
said
ephemeral
that. Yeah.
aspect of things.
I see.
But it's going to other, like, I think there's going to be a chapter on protest signs. There's going to be,
cool.
at least as of in this current incarnation, you know, there's going to be something about like what happens when like protest signs or political signage become viewed in the context of art or history as opposed to sort of the more immediate evaluation of them. So it's kind of,
that's interesting.
yeah, so it's going to be a lot of different takes on this. I realized when I was doing at this residency in August that I was beginning to use research as a little bit of a procrastination mechanism. Where I was like, but I have to find about this and this and this and this too.
It can become addictive.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. I was talking to a new friend of mine, this guy Chris Wood, who came to our launch party, and we've become friends since. We have a lot of similar interests, and he was talking about how accruing knowledge can become its own form of addiction. Like,
Yeah.
you know. And I was like, I totally get that. Like, I can find myself on Reddit or like Wikipedia or some more reputable source.
Yeah.
Like, you know, just digging into something, and it's like, wait, but what am I actually writing here? Like, you know.
Do you have anything on MAGA in there?
I think it's kind of going to culminate with like, I think there's going to be a lot of discussion of like the MAGA hats and also the Shepard Fairey Hope print that sort of came before it.
I was gonna say MAGA is like a palimpsest because it's been something that's been used in so many different iterations of the like
Reagan used it,
varying forms of the
Clinton
same
used
thing.
it.
Like going
Yeah.
back to like the you know Brexit did the same thing.
Yeah.
Their message was the same thing, like in a different form.
Yeah.
You know.
So it'll be 2020?
Yeah, I mean, at some point before the election in 2020 is kind of the best.
Topical.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get it out before the election. I didn't even think about that, but that's good. That's good publicity right there.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to read for us today?
So I'm going to read, I actually had a short story come out in an anthology very recently. The UK-based press Dostoevsky Wannabe.
Ooh.
Oh, I love that name. I've never heard of that press, but that's fucking awesome.
The press does some really, really great stuff.
Dostoevsky Wannabe, that's great.
They did an anthology of very short fiction inspired by the music of the Buzzcocks and Pete Shelley.
Not familiar.
Okay.
And basically, I think they had reached out to some writers and there was an open call for some, and I submitted something to the open call, and they said yes. And the book is now, I believe, available wherever books are sold.
Oh, cool.
And my contributor copy arrived in the mail yesterday, and I was very, very happy to see it. And there are some fantastic, fantastic writers in it.
No, I'm going to have to order this.
So, yeah.
I want to check it out.
So can I
Yeah,
give this a
whenever
go?
you're
for it.
ready.
Yep.
All right. So this is called Erased Pop Songs and Other Righteous Wakes.
Good title.
Of course we did it analog. Of course it was a volunteer operation. Of course it was carried out in secret, in a cavernous room after hours, a night shift confluence conducted under neon lights, with chalkboards and notebooks in hand. We aimed to preserve the forgotten songs we knew we couldn't forget, but couldn't remember hearing. It was complicated. The topic of remembering was always the topic of discussion. Here we stood or sat, charts and records in hand, looking for something undetectable, something imperceptible. The notion of a pop song that erased itself from memory, the idea of an absence where sound waves should be. The image of someone building a road before them and dismantling it once they've crossed it, essentially. We were looking for the ghost of that road, but in sonic form. Does that make sense? That was the goal. Trying to talk about this phenomenon outside of the room was always awkward. Those of us there understood what we sought. We pored over track listings and singles charts, looking for discrepancies, placeholders, errata. We made change logs and revision notes. We looked at lyric sheets and bootlegs and typed up notes from radio sessions. Sometimes, in soundproof alcoves, we'd sing snatches of the songs we thought we almost remembered in the hopes that something might spark some sort of recollection in something else. Nothing ever sparked anything, but we kept at it. There has to have been something there, right? There has to have been some pop song at the start of it all, a pop song that slowed off its skin and left a wake and a blank spot to sing along with. We sought that blank spot, and we sought that melody, and we wanted nothing more than to get it back in our heads, that song that earwormed its way in so well it crossed itself out, that sound we couldn't wait to never forget again. And that's it.
Ooh, that borders. Would you call that flash?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would certainly call it flash.
I love the idea of a short story, especially as like just like a contained enigma, you know? I really like that. It's like it is itself a contained mystery, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's kind of just like this. It feels like a lyrical path that just doesn't stop when the story ends, you know?
Yeah.
I like that kind of style. I'm trying to think of a, so to speak, analog right now, but it's kind of escaping me. There's some, I mean, I brought up Bolaño earlier. Some of his short stories are like that too.
Yeah, definitely.
But written in a different style than you, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Well, it's like one of the stories that I really enjoyed writing that was in Transitory was there's one story in there that sort of it was originally written. I had been given a prompt by another writer to kind of write something about a fictional film, and getting to write something about a fictional film was definitely, you know, a fun thing to kind of do and sort of create this whole alternate mythology around that. And I think there was a little of that when I was writing my novel Real that also came to mind in terms of like dealing with these weird historical artifacts and cultural artifacts and everything else. The novel I was working on after Real that has not come out yet, there's a novel called Ex-Members that's dealing in part with a music scene in a fictional town in northwestern New Jersey. And so getting into that involved like creating fictional artists and creating fictional musicians and getting to play with that and getting to play to, much like in this story, with the passage of time. One of the things that was fun about writing this was for whatever reason, because I am very much seeking to write a super commercial fiction, I have sort of embraced the novella as form. And
I love novellas.
Oh, I do too.
Yeah.
But I've definitely gotten the like, this is great, but this even happened with Real, which is not a particularly long novel. Like, this is great, but it's a little short. And so there's something else that I recently finished a draft of that I'm pretty happy with that's like a 30,000 word thing, and then there are two other things in progress that are also like very much, I think, are also going to probably fall into the novella / short novel category that I'm eager to get to. Like the main priority is getting a draft done of Political Sign, but I also am hoping that I will have a little bit of time when I'm on this residency to work on them as well, because I haven't sat down and worked on them in a while, and they're kind of starting to itch at the back of my brain and kind of like, hey, you should write more and you should kind of make some more headway on this.
You're preaching to the choir right now with my book out now and like all the readings and a lot of stuff going on, like the projects that I want to be working on. It's just like, it's like a constant voice in the back of my head. It's like a constant guilty conscience kind of. Yeah. Compunction maybe is a better word for it. So I know what you mean.
Well, when I was about to say Political Animal because of the magazine, Political Sign comes out, we should have another episode, because we've been wanting to do kind of political episode, maybe have Sugi and Wit on.
Yeah, that'd be
from
cool.
Fiction, nonfiction, because
they espouse
would be cool.
Politics and literature.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. But before we sign off, I have a question. You don't have to answer this. I'm curious, when you wrote that story, did you know the song that you were trying to think of, or was it an echo? Like, was it like a... Because I know you weren't thinking of a song. That's kind of the point. Yeah. You weren't thinking of a song, but what was the idea? Like, was there an idea, like a wish for a song that had been covered up? Like, you know, so, like, I guess in the spirit of, I'm Muddy Waters, and now fucking Eric Clapton is doing some, like, you know, some rendition, like, on Layla, and it's blowing up now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
I think for me, it's like, the Buzzcocks were always a band that I would kind of heard about, you know, as like a young... So I'm an only child.
Same.
Nice.
Yeah.
So a lot of my discovery of music was very, very, very happenstance. You know, I didn't really have like as many of my friends did, like an older sibling to kind of be like, oh, here's this really cool thing you should check out. So I was like very much just like flailing around and like finding stuff here and there, and occasionally still not really having any idea what I was doing. But eventually, like, and I think the Buzzcocks were always in the weird category of like a band that I would like read about as as like being influential on bands that I listen to. But there are certain bands where I'm like, oh, I know the first time I heard Fugazi or Public Enemy or someone like that. Like I can remember being like, oh, this is what all the fuss is about.
Yeah.
But with the Buzzcocks, I really didn't. Like, it was because it's like the first time I was like, oh, I'm going to sit down and listen to the Buzzcocks. Either's like, oh, this is a Buzzcocks song, and so is this one, and so is this one. But like, I did not have a similar thing of like, oh yeah, and the first time I heard this was totally on the radio or at a party or like when a friend of mine sat me down and was like, you need to hear this band. Like, which is how, especially bands that I've like been listening to for over half my life, generally I have a story behind like, oh, this is how I first heard them or them or them. And I don't know where the hell that came. Like, so it's this weird sense of like listening to the Buzzcocks where like there is this strange part of my brain that sort of thinks almost like these feel like these songs that just like one night I woke up just like having remembered them from somewhere else. And I was sort of trying to use that very surreal bit of Flash to kind of put that feeling, put that sensation into something resembling language.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I like how you started off with we're doing this analog, and like you got all of them on chalkboards and everything. That's cool. Because I recently heard someone refer to cigarettes as analogs.
Oh wow.
Because and I love that. So don't you fuckers steal that from me. I'm using that. But okay, yeah. I'm gonna.
Awesome.
I'm gonna. Is there anything else you want to add? I was gonna sign off.
No, I think that's all good to me.
You're good.
Thank you for being on,
Absolutely.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thanks again,
Tobias,
for having me on.
Andrew,
Yeah.
full
right.
circle.
Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you like what you heard, please subscribe and review on whichever platform you're listening. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Animal Riot Press or through our website, animalriotpress.com. This has been the 36th episode of the Animal Riot Podcast with your host, Brian Birnbaum, and featuring Tobias Carroll. Transcripts for our deaf and hard of hearing animals are provided by Jonathan Kay. This episode was cut by our podcast assistant, Dylan Thomas, and we are produced by me, Katie Rainey. See you later, you filthy animals.
Yes, sir, it's the burn. Bombing on y'all and getting gully as the fern. I don't know much about